Amen. Last week, I started this series called The Disciples. I love looking at their stories. You and I don't do it very often to look back into what the early church looked like. And how many do I have in here that you were born and raised in church? Like your early memories are in the church, they're in the youth ministries, they're in the kids ministry, they're in Sunday school with a teacher who you're pretty sure didn't want to be there. Anybody? Yeah. I got wore out pretty good over one of those teachers. Anyway, that's a totally different story, not for today. I don't remember a time in my life where I wasn't involved in church. My dad led worship. I remember pretty much where Heather's at, but one row back of chairs upside down, drawing on the bottom of the chair while my dad was leading worship and church was going. Like, that's my earliest memory. I'm probably 3-4 years old, something like that. I don't think it was during service, but I can't imagine that I was still in any other moment than service. So probably pretty sure laying under the chair, drawing around some old stuck gum, and it was gross. But that's my whole life. Like, I don't remember a time where I wouldn't have called myself a Christian. That my early memories were being raised in the church. My parents go through a divorce when I'm 12. And everything that I knew about God and church and life was shattered in that moment. And there became this tension in my life of now I can't just sit under my parents' faith. Does that make sense? Like, I just walked with my parents because they went to church. I didn't have a choice. I was 10. And so I went to church and I did the things that you do as a church kid, and I knew who Jesus was in my head. I had this intellectual understanding that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, but I didn't have a good definition of what sin was, other than getting caught for climbing the fence when I wasn't supposed to climb the fence, right? Like, I just had punishment as the equation to sin and never really owned it myself. Well, at 13, I remember this really clear moment where I felt God wanting to do something pretty major in my life, and it felt too much. And I remember being at a retreat in Ruidoso, New Mexico, this old cabin, shag carpet, where it was playing some music and praying, and I remember being on my face, like just whiffing in whatever was in that carpet, having this moment with God of like, give me your life. And I was like, I already have. I've been baptized at that point like 4 or 5 times. Like, they kept dunking me because I was a bad kid. And so they just kept like, let's try again. It didn't take the first time, which is not in Scripture. That's not how it's supposed to be done, so don't take that. But I remember wrestling with God going like, I've already done all this. He's like, you haven't given me your life. And one of the more clear moments God spoke to me, like, I hadn't surrendered my actual life. I had decided I didn't want to go to hell, so I said, Lord, don't let me go there. And I'd made that decision, but I had yet to surrender my life. And I bring all that up because when you read the New Testament, you see the word Christian how many times? Anybody got a guess? 3. The first 2 are insults, where it's like, oh, you're a Christian? You're like a little Christ? Didn't that guy die on the cross? Right? So that's the first 2. They were insults. The third one was this hint at, yeah, we're going to be like Christ. Like a little bit of boldness stuck in there. But what's the word that's used to describe believers in the New Testament? Hint, it's on the screen. Disciples is mentioned in the New Testament 269 times in the New Testament. In the Gospels alone, the first 4 books. 238 times. Why? Because the word disciple means follower, learner. It is what you and I are supposed to be when we say we are Christians. We are supposed to be followers, learners, disciples. We don't have a context for that. Apprentice is maybe the closest we get. If you want to become a welder or a plumber or an electrician, they don't just say, hey, don't touch the red wire to the black wire or stuff happens. They send you out with someone who knows what he's doing, and you apprentice under that person for a season. Same thing with welding, same with a lot of crafts. That you get underneath someone who knows how to do it, and you follow them. And they teach you scenarios, and they teach you practices, they teach you what to do, what not to do, so that you don't burn down a house, right? In Luke 14, verse 26, Jesus goes ahead and he lets those who are following him, at this point a pretty large crowd, had turned into disciples. They had turned into followers who were trying to learn what Jesus was about. And here's what he tells them. If anyone is preaching to a crowd, if any of y'all want to come to me and you do not hate your father or your mother or your wife or your children, your brothers or your sisters, yes, even your own life. How many of you know, like, that crowd was going like, what? Like, we just wanted to watch you do some cool miracles and hopefully, like, get a good seat at your table when you finally come into your kingdom. What do you mean I gotta hate my mom? Can't even talk back to my mom because she's got that backhand of glory that would come a fly in my way. So what do you mean hate her? It was this really hard message that Jesus starts to push into his disciples. Like, if you don't despise everything that you have grown to love in respect to how much you love me, you cannot be my disciple. If the amount that you love me and prioritize me is not so beyond what you love your wife or your kids or your mom or your dad or your own life, you can't be my disciple. That's a hard message. You and I are like, hey, you can come to church, air conditioning will be good, we'll meet you in the parking lot with an encouraging message, we'll make sure your kids aren't in here to distract you, we've even got snacks. You can be a Christian too. That's not that message. That message is real hard to actually walk out. The next verse, he says this, whoever does not bear his own cross. Now we touch on the cross a little bit. You have to at Easter to just remind people it was brutal. It was the most creative way to torture someone that Rome ever came up with. And they got really good at that type of stuff. And the cross was still like the best one. Because it displayed their shame, their nakedness for the whole world as they suffocated and bled out over sometimes days. It was brutal. And Jesus uses that picture and says, if you don't die like that for me, you can't be my disciple. Everybody encouraged so far? Did I have one more verse there? No, verse 33. Sorry. I added something after I printed my notes. And so, verse 33, he goes through that whole section. He talks about how you have to prioritize your love for him and you're following him above everything else. And here's how he sums it up. So, therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all, everything, if you don't turn your back on the world in such a way that they think you have lost your mind, you can't be my disciple. Jesus had a way of getting down to the root of what people were wanting to do. At this point, he had a crowd of disciples. And he was realizing they were showing up because they wanted to see something cool. He was this miracle worker. Everywhere he went, someone was coming out of the grave, or someone was never walked before they're walking, and now somebody who had never seen could see again, and someone who was an outcast and had leprosy now is clean. He was just walking and doing unbelievable things, and everyone around him was like, I got to see the show. I just want to see what he's doing. When the crowd gets too big, he grabs 2 loaves and a fish. Is it 1 loaf and 2 fish? 2 fish and 1 loaves? He grabbed a snackle box and he fed like 5,000 people. He's like, I got some crackers. And he fed 5,000 people were men. 5,000 men is probably 15 to 20,000 people with some snacks. So they're like, yeah, I'm showing up with that guy. He brings the good food. And then he does it again. So like this crowd is just there for the entertainment, and he says, hey, Christian, you've missed the whole point. The whole point is I want your whole life. I heard a pastor say it this way: salvation is free. Following Jesus will cost you everything. Salvation is free and easy. All you have to do is confess with your mouth and believe in your heart, and you are saved. But Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, it's going to cost you your whole life. That brings us to who we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk about the famous, infamous John the Apostle. Not the baptizer, but the apostle. The one who outran Peter to the tomb and then put it in his book. The one who was wrestling with the guards in the Garden of Gethsemane and lost his clothes and did not include that in his book. Mark did, though. That guy who wrote 5 of the books, he wrote his book, his gospel, John. He was real creative on his titles, so he also wrote 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. And then Revelation, while he was isolated on the island of Patmos in prison. He was the son of Zebedee and Salome. Not Salami. Salome. She is mentioned in the book a few times. She was at the garden. Not the garden, sorry. She was at the crucifixion. She was there to anoint his body with Mary. And, I didn't put that in my notes. And then she also has this moment, this shameless mom plug that is so funny to look at. They're walking down the road, and all of a sudden, she pulls Jesus aside, and she kneels at his feet, and she says, Jesus. And he says, what do you want, woman? This is not the first encounter he's had with her. And she says, can you make my 2 sons like sit at your right and your left hand? Can you make them really important? And he goes, you don't know what you're asking. She goes, I do. And he goes, you can't bear this cup. And she goes, we can. And it's like this, I want my kids to be governors or senators. I want them to be so important that everyone knows their name. We have an account in the scripture where they walk into the temple inner courts, and Peter's not allowed in, but John is. And then he comes back and tells the guards, hey, you can let him in. He was a person of affluence. He was a fisherman. His dad was a fisherman, but he had hired hands, which means he probably had a fleet of boats. While Peter had a boat, John's daddy had a bunch of boats. And so they were well off. He had a lot of influence. He had a lot of say. John's books are known for one word. Does anybody have any idea what that word is? He mentions this word a lot. Love. In his 5 books, he mentions the word love 81 times. In 1 John, which we'll get to in a little bit, the most frequent word used in the entire book is the word agape. He and his brother were known as the sons of, nobody remembers? Thunder. Like the coolest nickname in all of Scripture. But you and I don't really get what that means to be the son of thunder. The sons of Boanerges is how you say it in Greek. And Boanerges is translated thunder, but it really comes across as zeal, impulsive, and rageful. John and his brothers were known for their temper and their rage. They would lash out they would say things they shouldn't have said. We give Peter a bad rap for those things. Peter didn't write his own book. John did, so he left that stuff out. But I guarantee you, John had similar stories to Peter, going like accidentally cutting someone's ear off or rebuking Jesus and going, "Get behind me, Satan." John had that type of demeanor. He was known by Jesus as a son of rage. What happens that he now writes 5 books that are known for love? He writes about love more than anybody but probably Solomon. But his love was different. That's a different story. That's for a marriage retreat. Mark chapter 3. So Mark 3:16, we're going to have a lot of 3:16s today, so just kind of follow along. But Mark 3:16 says, "And he appointed the 12, Simon, whom he gave the name Peter, and James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who he gave the name Boanerges, sons of thunder." It became his identity. Peter was Simon, a pebble. He became Peter, the rock. God had a way of identifying the things in people. And then as we see with John, it shifts from a son of rage to the author of love, which is pretty cool. Luke chapter 9 says this. "And when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face towards Jerusalem, and he sent out a messenger ahead of him, who went and entered the village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him, because his face was set towards Jerusalem." Before we go to the next one, he made an intentional moment that they go into this village of Samaria, and they did not accept him because Jesus was looking towards the cross. He had already decided, like, I'm not hanging out here. This is not what we're going to be doing. I'm headed to Jerusalem. So Jesus sets his face towards Jerusalem. But here is what James and John say as a result of that. Verse 54 says, "And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, 'Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven and consume them?'" Now, I don't know how many of you are Bible scholars or not. There's another moment where fire comes out of heaven and consumes some people. And they were active worshipers of Baal and Ashtaroth, a false god that was built on infant sacrifice, built on sexual, terrible things. It was an abomination to what God was doing. Baal and Ashtaroth we could talk about for a long time, but Elijah comes into this wicked place and sets the scene where he's one against 600 prophets, and he says, "Let your God consume this altar." And then he starts mocking them, and they go through all this ritual. They're cutting themselves, and they're crying out all day long, and nothing happens. And Elijah's like, "Well, maybe your God's on the toilet. Maybe he's taking a nap." And he calls on God, and God consumes his altar sacrifice. Fire from heaven comes down and consumes it. And he had poured a bunch of water on it, cleaned up all of that. And the next thing that happens is fire comes down and consumes all 600 prophets. Like, this is legend, this is lure, urban legend to all of these Jewish boys. Like, man, you know that one time that Elijah called down fire and took out all the bad guys? James and John are like, "The Samaritans didn't love you, Jesus. Can we call fire down?" Like, what a moment that they were like, we finally get to flex on these clowns. We finally get to show them how, like, we're in God's circle, and you're not. You Samaritans, you runts, you half-breeds. Like, it's about time that God took you out. That's their heart. And Jesus rebukes them. He says, "Guys, you've missed the whole point. These sons of thunder, these sons of rage, these sons of impulsive, out-of-line behavior, somehow John turns into the author of love." He mentions love over and over again. But before we go very far, what do you love? Here's what's wrong with the English language. Love has become a junk drawer word. You love your mama, and you love tacos. And we use the same word for both. You love the Cardinals when they're not winning. And you love the way the rain smells. We use love interchangeably in our language. It has no power, it has no meaning. What's amazing about the Greek language is there's a couple of words for love, and they have very distinct definitions. The word that John uses over and over and over again, there's a couple times he uses phileo, which is like Philadelphia, it's brotherly love. He uses that in a couple of scriptures. One of the things that I meant to do last week and didn't get a chance to is when Peter is sitting there and Jesus is sitting across from him and he says, "Do you agape me, Peter?" He says, "Lord, you know I phileo love you." He says, "Do you love me unconditionally, Peter?" And he says, "Well, I love you like a friend. Are we still friends?" And Jesus says it again. "Do you agape me?" And he says, "Well, I phileo you." And then what crushed Peter was he said, "Well, do you phileo me?" He says, "Hey, I know you can't get to a place right now that you can agape me, but do you love me like a brother?" And it broke him. And that was their moment that they came together. And what we see for the rest of Peter's life is he agape loves. Which, what is agape then? What does agape mean? It is this word that describes a sacrificial, unconditional, unyielding, unbreaking love. We see this word in John 3:16. For God so agape loved the world that he gave his only son. That he knew it was going to be a sacrifice. It wasn't a passive or interchangeable love. It was this unbreaking, I will choose to love you even if it costs me everything, agape love. We see it again in 1 John. Like I said, the most frequently used word in the book of 1 John is agape, which is a wild thing. I hadn't heard that till I started studying this. Like, what a word to define a book. 1 John is agape. 1 John 3:16 says this, for God so loved the world. That's John 3:16. 1 John 3:16. Please tell me I put it in there. There it is. Thank you. Okay. By this we know agape. That we know that he laid down his life for us, that we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his, 17. If anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and yet closes his heart against him, how does God's agape love, his sacrificial love, live in me? If I have all the things and I see a brother in need and I don't reach out to provide that need, how does God's agape love live in me? Meaning, his sacrifice has not changed my heart. 1 John 4. Beloved, this is verse 7. Let us agape one another. For agape is from God. Whoever has been born of God and knows, whoever loves, whoever agapes, has been born of God and knows God. Verse 8. Anyone who does not agape does not love God, because God is agape. The way this actually raw translates in Scripture. If you aren't agape-ing, if you aren't sacrificially loving people, then you don't have his love in you. If it is not actively working its way out in your life, if the agape love of God is not working its way out in you, he's not in you. Verse 9. If this love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him, in him, by him, in this is agape. Not that we have loved God, but that he agape us and sent his Son as propitiation, payment on our behalf for our son. Beloved, if God so agape us, we ought to agape one another. There's a difference between agape and the English word language. Ain't no tacos sacrificing themselves for me. I guess they are, but that's not really what we're talking about. Agape has a power behind it, a steadfastness, a breaking through whatever barrier may be there. Those of you who are married signed up to agape love. How many of you know that's a struggle? Yeah, if you're sitting next to your wife, keep them low. Barely, only sometimes. All of us, it's so hard to love regardless of what they say, what they do, how their attitude, how their day went. To love regardless. Love is a choice then. It's not a feeling. What we know in America is that love is a feeling. How you feel today determines on how you treat those around you. How your job's going and your boss is treating you determines how you treat the barista who was slow getting your coffee. Your love is wholeheartedly built on feelings and attitudes, and how my life is going will determine how I treat my kids, my wife, my mom, my dad, my neighbor, my everyone. If we looked at love like agape, then we have to love regardless. If we have the love of God in us, the agape love in us, then we are now commanded to represent that love to everyone around us, regardless of how they treat you. I wish that wasn't in there, because that's really hard. I mean, love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah, the good neighbor. We can do that. It also says love your enemy. Agape love is love your enemy. The one who hates you, you choose to love because he chose to love you when you were an enemy of his. This moves us into John's writing style is really different than the other Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke are called the synoptic Gospels. They are all very similar. They actually track with each other. They have similar language, little different audiences, but you can see the same miracles in each one. You can see the same events in each one. John is kind of out here. So it's a part of the Gospels because it's in the time frame. It's the same story. So they included it in the Gospels because it's a different perspective. But writing style, it is so different. It is written to a Greek audience. It is written to a philosophy that was so different than the Hebrews. We know this because he starts with a word. John 1:1 is where we're going. But he starts with a word for the word that was used really deeply in Greek culture. That word is, anybody know? Logos. Logos was this word that the Greeks had made into a philosopher. I'll say it this way. Philosophers describe the word logos as all knowledge and wisdom, the mind and purpose of God that permeated, went into all of nature. The logos was this universe type of word. It described the thing that kept it all together. Logos was the force that would get chaos back in order. It was the word that we've got people in our life that use the word universe. The universe willed it. And it's like, no, that's not, but okay. That's what the Greeks were using the word logos for. Okay? Just so you can kind of have a picture of what John's using this word on purpose. The Hebrews had a picture of the word of God was God. When Moses comes down, it uses that phrase, the word of God. And it's not necessarily talking about the written word, but it's talking about the God man himself. But logos is used here by John in John 1:1 to connect the idea of a singular God who knows us and wants to be with us and has now come down to be with us to a Greek audience that had hundreds of gods. So he starts out the very first gospel, his gospel, with this phrase, in the beginning was the Logos, was the God that permeates all of nature and caused it all to do all the things. And the Logos was with God, right? And the Logos was God. In the beginning was Logos. He is it. He's the man. He was all the things that you're looking for. So he's speaking to his audience, saying it like that. Verse 2, and he was in the beginning with God. And 3, and all things were made through him, and without him not anything has been made that was made. And verse 4, and in him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Logos is Christ. And he begins to press into this Greek audience, like the thing that you want to believe in, the thing that you think is working out there, I've got a name for it. His name is Jesus. And so he begins to be very pointed towards this Greek audience. And that's why love resonated so much with him. That's why you and I read the book of John. We're in it with our life groups this semester. We've been working through the book of John. Why? One theologian said that the book of John is so shallow that a child can understand it, but so deep that you can lose an elephant in it. It's a strange phrase. But what he's saying is it's obtainable for the baby Christian, and it's so deep that a theologian can get lost in it. The book of John is written in a way that is easy to grab, right? The Word was God. The Word was with God. The Word, you missed a phrase, is really easy to understand. But if you start to study Logos, it's like, that is a massive sentence. It's so big. You and I know what love means, but if we understand what agape means, the book of John comes to life. It's deeper. We can understand love on a surface level. I know how I love my kids. I know how I love my mom. I know how I love Chris. I know how I love y'all. I got this level of love, but what he is saying when he uses the word agape is it's bigger and more dynamic and more costly than anything you've ever understood. And so the book of John is obtainable, but vast in depth. I saw this breakdown of the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, and it says it like this. Matthew shows Jesus came from Abraham to David and demonstrates that he was the Messiah promised in the Old Testament. Mark shows Jesus came from Nazareth and demonstrated that Jesus was a servant. Luke, that Jesus came from Adam, demonstrated that Jesus was the perfect man to fix what Adam had broken. John shows Jesus came from heaven and demonstrated he was God. Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written to Hebrew audience. They lineaged Jesus, why he fulfilled the prophecies, what he had done for them. That's maybe why you and I have to kind of dig a little bit deeper to understand Matthew, because you're not a Hebrew. And you haven't been taught all the backstories. What Matthew, Mark, and Luke did is they tied Jesus to all of their history and says, here's what he came and he fixed. He demonstrated he fulfilled the promises. He was a servant that Isaiah promised he would be. And he was the perfect man that fixed Adam's screw up. But John approaches this in such a different way. He writes that the thing that all of the Greeks had been looking for was access to this universal God. And they just called it Logos, just an aura or the universe. But he came and he walked amongst us. John writes different miracles than the others. He writes from a different perspective because here's what he says in John 20, verse 30. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Christ. He is the Son of God. He is the Word. He's the Logos. And that by believing in him, so that believing you may have life in his name. He wrote his book, all of his books, with the sole purpose of you and I understanding God is love. But not just this wishy-washy, safe love. This radical, over the top, he sacrificed more than you and I can ever repay. He laid his life down in the most brutal way that he could possibly lay it down for you. And John says, I wrote this book so that you may believe. Not so that you may have information. Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote it so that we could have information about the life of God. The life of Jesus on earth. They wrote their book so that you and I would have this historical account of who Jesus was. John wrote it so that you would believe. It's easy for us to see this son of thunder and dismiss who he was before Jesus. Who he was before Jesus was rageful, selfish. His mom asked something that was so ridiculous that when the other disciples found out, they started ridiculing him. What do you mean you sent your mom to go see if you could get a place next to Jesus? Like, that's wild. Like, those of you who are in high school sports, we would have made fun of that guy for the rest of our lives. And I'm pretty sure they did. That's why Mark wrote about him running out of the garden naked. It's just like, that guy. Is it hard for us to realize, let me say that a different way. Is it hard for you to believe that who you were doesn't have to be who you are? John's identity of rage, of getting it wrong, of saying the wrong thing at the right time, of putting his foot in his mouth, of living for himself, his own elevation, to God transforms him. We talked about this last week, but the one who was standing next to Peter when he was in front of all of the Jewish leaders, the guy who was standing next to him when he said, hey, yeah, by the way, y'all guys, y'all killed this man. You, the Pharisees, the elders, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, y'all killed him in front of the high priest. They, with boldness, says, you're the one that killed this man who came and raised people from the dead and performed miracles, this perfect man, Jesus. You killed him. And they said, well, you can't talk about him anymore. This is Acts chapter 4, if you were wondering. And they said, hey, I don't know if it's right to listen to you or to listen to God. Either way, I guess you'll have to figure it out. But we can't stop talking about all that we've seen. The boldness that comes out of them from being this, broken man. who couldn't get it right, to standing with boldness going, all I know to do is proclaim Jesus. That every single disciple, they replaced Judas because he killed himself and betrayed Jesus. They filled his spot. But out of the 12 disciples, every single one of them died a martyr's death, except one. Do you know which one? John. Peter, we read this last week. Jesus said, they're going to stretch out your hands, they're going to crucify you, they're going to take you to a place you don't want to go. And Peter, in his wisdom, said, well, what about John? And Jesus said, you don't worry about John. He'll live forever if I want him to. Yeah, he did. He's the one, he died of old age in Ephesus. He was like 80 years old, which is really old for a first century. Like, nobody lived 80. And John goes to Patmos. He gets isolated. Why did he go to Patmos? Anybody know? Because they tried to martyr him. They dumped him into boiling oil and they didn't kill him. And they were so freaked out that he was in the boiling oil and he kept proclaiming the gospel that they took him out and they sent him away. It's like, well, we can't kill him, so let's hide him. Then he started writing letters. The boldness that came out of these disciples transformed the entire world. Worship team, if you come up. You and I have an opportunity every single day, in the comfort of our homes, in the comfort of our jobs, in church on a Sunday morning, in our cars, to live a life fully devoted towards Jesus. You have that opportunity. You have that pleasure that you can choose whether to be a disciple, whether to be a casual churchgoer. Every single one of these disciples laid their life down. It cost them everything. But John's a really cool story. Someone who realized just how immense God loved him. And truly what the sacrifice was that God walked through so that he could have life. That's our choice this morning. That's our choice every day. Are you going to live it as someone who got baptized when they were 9 years old and been loving the Lord their whole life? Or are you going to have a moment where you give him everything? You bow your heads. Here's what's cool about Jesus, is what you did yesterday is not the whole story. You get to choose today what you're going to do today, and tomorrow what you're going to do tomorrow. And I want to encourage you, as we close, that you do some business with God and you go, Lord, I have been a weak, soft Christian. I've been saved maybe a long time, maybe I've been saved a short time. But I'm tired of living for myself. I'm going to be all the way sold out, forsaking all other things so that I can call myself a disciple of Jesus Christ. Nothing else matters. The cross before me, the world behind me. I'm walking towards my cross every day. Jesus, I lay my life down so that you may be glorified. Be the king of my life. Be my everything, Jesus, so that I can with boldness proclaim your name. If that's you this morning, do business with God. Let him know. I'm tired of being right here. I want to be in pursuit of you. You stand as we close.